David sat at his desk in the mayor's office. He'd been the official mayor of Plasmatropolis for a while now. Years and years ago, he had been an animator at Black Plasma Studios, but had eventually retired to move on to video game design. He had become successful in this field and became a very wealthy man, more so than before, even. But eventually, he grew older. Nowadays, he had a beard. His face was laced with wrinkles, and his blonde hair contained flecks of white and grey. He'd retired from his work as a game designer at some point and decided to enter politics and become the mayor. Of course, him being voted in was inevitable due to his reputation. At that point, his work was more of something to prevent him from growing bored. Despite that, he took it very seriously and worked hard to govern the city. The thing was, there was a term limit, and once his term ended, David would live out the rest of his life in peace. As for the rest of Black Plasma Studios, immediately after David had retired from the team, it had been widely expected that Sam would take over as the new leader. However, Sam, who'd since officially married Krista and adopted Zakaitan Kultaris, had been busy raising his new child, so it was actually Thomas who had taken charge for a while. But as David grew up, so did everyone else, and eventually everyone moved on. BPS was reformed into an animation academy, a place where young and ambitious animators were welcome to learn and practice their skills. The former members of the Black Plasma team did little more than supervise and educate those learning from their legacies. David would never want to experience another incident like the Drag invasion or the Ardoni gang wars in Plasmatropolis, but he still had to admit, he missed the thrill which came with such events. Oh well, those times were over. His phone rang and he picked it up. The voice on the other end introduced themselves as a police officer. What he said next, however, caught David off guard. Upon hearing the cop's news, he almost dropped the phone, and his entire body began to shake. No! It couldn't be! Not him too! He had to make sure this wasn't some sort of sick joke. As a mayor, David firmly refused to tolerate prank calls. Who would ever prank him about something like this? He couldn't find an answer. He just wanted to believe so badly that what he was hearing wasn't real. A suicide, Mr. Mayor. A neighbor saw it happen himself. We were notified quickly. A police officer said a crowd of people had gathered around and the police were forcing them back and setting up a perimeter to stop bystanders from getting any closer. Within the perimeter was David himself. He was on his knees, tears welling up in his eyes as he saw Achillean Nestoris, markings pitch black and lifeless, a simple hole in his throat, diamond staff and a single song by his side. A self-inflicted aggro beam attack, it seemed. David shook his head. This can't be. Why would he kill himself? But he didn't need anyone to answer that question for him. It was already obvious. Achillean must have been unable to handle the absence of Ingressus, his late husband, who died the year before in a horrific car crash. David could recall, clear as day, the funeral he had attended, and the statue he had ensured was built in Ingressus's honor in the center of the city. After all, the Voltaris had been a hero of Plasmatropolis and a long-time collaborator of BPS. It was unfair and cruel how after all that, something so spontaneous as a driver guzzling down far too much alcohol that night ended it all. That's what Achillean had been saying since then anyway. David agreed with him, but he also knew Achillean was deeply troubled by Ingressus's death, and had done his best to help him. However, David never expected it to go this far. Now, Achillean too was dead. It seemed he'd hidden his true emotions well. David sighed. He wasn't going to let this distress him too much. He'd already dealt with the loss of friends before. Failing to move on was precisely why Achillean had ended up this way to begin with. He stood back up. See to it that his body is buried, right next to Ingressus, and have an Ardoni light his grave, David requested. Soon enough I'll release an official statement on this matter and request to the builders of Plasmatropolis to build Achillean's statue, once again next to Ingressus. Am I understood? The police in the area nodded. David turned back to the body with a gulp, but then turned away as the police rushed to Achillean and put him on a stretcher. David simply smiled, remembering the golden age, the glory days, where Ingressus and Achillean fought alongside BPS against enemies such as Thalius or William. He didn't cry because that time was over. He smiled because that time had happened.